Hello and welcome to another video on British military swordsmanship. In this lesson we're going to be looking at how to respond or how to parry against thrusting attacks. Now with a sabre like this, you expect the majority of the attacks to be coming in against you are going to be cuts. And against most fighters that will be the case. But there were lots of fighters that emphasised thrust work. And if you're fighting, say, spadroon fighters, or a lot of French stars, for example, people who've done small sword and spadroon, they're going to be doing loads of point work, so you will encounter it. And even people who are using the sabre this curve will still be thrusting. Don't be under the mistaken idea that these kind of curved swords are not good for thrusting. They're exceptionally good for thrusting. They just thrust a little bit differently than straight swords. The angles work a little bit differently. They thrust well still. So how do we respond to it? Now, the thing to bear in mind with a thrust is all of the energy is coming forwards. So rather than trying to make a strong parry with the sort of force or strong of our sword, and really having to make sure it's very strong, that it doesn't get beaten through, a thrust can be bypassed with the smallest amount of energy. You know, Esther could actually thrust forward against me here, and I could just pass it off with my hand. Now, if you try doing that against a cutting technique, you're going to lose my hand or my arm. Whereas the thrust, all the energy is coming forward, so we can just bypass the energy to the side. And that's worth bearing in mind when you do responses to thrust work. And the reason you need to bear it in mind is a few things really. One is you can do certain engagements that would be weak against some cutting techniques. So for example, striking further up the blade or with some of the back edge techniques, or with the smallest amount of movement where you will get hit or driven through with a cut, are still quite useful against the thrust. So that's the first thing you want to know, and we're going to look at that now. In terms of what Roth says about this, he says, essentially, he divides it into thrusts that come over the sword and thrusts that come under the sword. So, if the thrust is coming high, thrust, I mean, it's just a high target zone. You can thrust in any, you can thrust like that if you want, but it doesn't matter. Back, I don't mind which is thrusting as long as it comes high. And thrust again, there you go. So inside guard and back, now thrust on the outside, outside parry, and back. So when they thrust high over the sword, we just use outside, inside like this. And you would tend to bring the guard a little bit lower than a cut, because again with a cut you've got to get the strongest part of the sword up to where the parry is going to be. So you'll frequently see inside parries and outside parries being made at this height, whereas against a thrust, your biggest concern actually is that they dip the point a little bit and come right under or disengage you. So actually when a thrust comes in, better to stay fairly low on it, on your hilt, and get nice coverage. So you've got a nice diagonal sort of parry here, hilt a little bit lower, plenty of coverage, and back, and thrust outside, there we go. Hilt low, tip high, and back. So if the thrusts come in high, that's how we do it. And if they thrust under, so if they're, for example, coming under our blade towards our stomach, possibly even our leg, it's not so likely they'll be attacking the leg with a thrust, but they might. But say, for example, our stomach, lower torso area, we just strike down into outside half hanger. And that's a really, really strong way of parrying actually almost any thrust. Even though some of the high thrusts, for example, you can still pass off relatively easily using that technique. It's sort of a good all-rounder. So that's what he says about when they come low or when they come high. So it just comes down to inside and outside guards with a fairly low hilt, or dropping ourselves into outside hanger, half hanger. Now the only big sort of risk you really want to bear in mind here is that they're going to want to come and cut through and cut one afterwards. That's what I would do, and I like to bait people with it by starting with a thrust as a feint, or even I intended to actually thrust and then carry through. So what tends to happen is this. Esther attacks low, and I do outside half hanger, but then she rotates and cuts me cut one to the head. And a lot of people will intentionally do that. So you just have to bear in mind that you need to, from this position, be very quickly able to just bring it over into outside half hanger or inside hanging guard. So that's just one thing to bear in mind. Sort of one risk of it, if you like. So that's what Roth says about parrying off thrusts. So it's slightly lower inside outside guards, dropping into outside half hanger against low thrusts. There's one other thing I would mention from some later systems as well, is that you can parry with the back edge down here very, very easily, because again, there's not much strength in what's coming at us, so if Esther thrusts on the outside line, we can just bring the hilt across. In many ways, actually, like sport fencers would do with foil or épée, is that we don't worry about edges because it's a thrust, not a cut. We don't need strength in that parry, we just need to displace slightly. So that's the other thing to bear in mind. And the last thing I would say is, in terms of parrying against thrusting, is you can use beats as well. And beats against thrusts can be quite good because they can throw your opponents off really quite well. And you'll see this a lot in some of the stuff people do with Polish sabre. So for example, thrust comes in and we beat off, usually with the back edge, but there's no reason why you couldn't actually strike with the true edge as well. But it works really nicely with the back edge, as you'll see in loads of fighting styles. So I should mention that as well. So there you go. That is how to defend against thrusting techniques. And when you make this parry or this defense against thrusting techniques, as ever, wherever it's safe, always counter. So for example, Esther thrust here inside, snap, cut straight back to the head. Strikes outside, parry, strike to the head. Okay? Thrust under, parry, strike to the head. I like striking to the head. You strike to the head with a nice powerful cut, the fight should be over. So there you go. Your defense against thrust work is just this and this. And if you want to, you can use this action as well with the back edge, and you can also beat with the back edge. Okay, thanks for watching.